Welcome in. You didn't find this by accident. This is the Whisper Lounge, a soft space for the conversations we weren't supposed to have. While you're here, you can leave a tip using the captivate.fm link in the show bio. And if you're ready, your complimentary 7-day exploration journal is waiting. Just head to whisperlounge.club/join to claim it and be one of the first to step inside to explore. Hi everyone, I'm excited to talk about the topic today. It's not one of the topics that I listed off as a future topic in the previous episode, but I promise we will get to those. Today's topic is a little bit more of an introduction, which I think is important to discuss. And I titled it, If There's Nothing to Hide, Why Am I Hiding? You may have noticed that this podcast effectively is called Untitled. It has no title. And you don't know who I am. I believe in acceptance. I believe in living without shame, without judgment, without the need to divide things into good and bad. And yet, here I am with you. And it begs the question, am I hiding? This podcast is unnamed. I don't share my real identity. If people from my other social or professional circles knew I was doing this, it would potentially change a lot of things. So I ask myself, am I a hypocrite? Or am I just navigating reality? So what I want to talk about with those questions is, I truly have been thinking about this. There's a tension maybe between the things that I believe or that we believe in reality. I genuinely believe, as I mentioned in the previous episode, in non-dualism, in no right or wrong. Maybe kind of like just experience and perspective, but maybe that's oversimplifying it. More of an idea that right or wrong all exists together. Not necessarily that they don't exist, but they don't exist as separate things, if more like pieces of the same thing. I mean, truly, when I'm thinking and talking about these things, especially non-duality, I'm thinking of the yin and yang sign symbol, where, it's separate, but it's not separate. It's all together and it's all one symbol. And yet I have to exist in a world that does operate in binaries. A lot of binaries. Respectable versus taboo, acceptable versus unacceptable, and right versus wrong. So does having this part of my life that is somewhat in secret, does it mean I'm ashamed? Or am I just playing the game, doing it in a wise way? So if we compare hypocrisy to survival, some people might say, if you really believe in sex positivity and non-judgment, why not be open about it? But is it hypocrisy to move strategically in a world that isn't built for full acceptance? I don't know. So am I really making a choice between hypocrisy and survival? Or do I feel like maybe there's something else going on? If I believe in non-judgment, sex positivity, breaking free from these rigid moral structures, why is this podcast unnamed? And why am I keeping my identity separate from it? There's part of me that thinks that this is actually, for me, a space between fear and strategy. And I'm talking about this because it really has been coming up a lot in my thoughts. I think of people who I think of as so brave, like one of my favorite people to watch and be entertained by is Jonathan on Queer Eye. The courage that they have to just be themselves no matter what, and even the courage of the most simple example in the queer community of coming out of the closet. A lot of people who are close to me don't know the things that I've explored, experienced, and want to explore and identify with, or think I identify with. And sometimes I really wish I could be brave, and maybe I'm not being brave by not talking about it. But there's another part of me that feels like there's a strategy to what I'm doing. Sometimes I think that maybe this is the smartest way to have these conversations, to have the conversations outside of labels and any scrutiny, and kind of eliminating those immediate assumptions that come with attaching a name and face to something. As soon as you see me, you're going to draw conclusions, just seeing my face, or just knowing where I live, or knowing, I don't know, other details about my life, maybe my financial status. All those things come with immediate assumptions that would be made. Maybe change also happens more effectively when people feel like they're discovering something rather than being confronted by it. This is a big point for me, because if I were to just come out in your face and say the things that we're going to talk about, I think a lot of people would be so confronted that it would put them in a defensive place. And it would make it almost impossible, if not very difficult, to have the conversations that I want to have, and that I know the people around me want to have. And so maybe creating a space where there is some discovery and curiosity allows for it to be discovered, each person to discover it on their own terms. And maybe a hidden space is still a real space. And because it's hidden, people feel safe enough to explore. But there is maybe a role of shame or fear associated with what I perceive as social constraints. Even as I believe in acceptance, I think there's part of me that's still unlearning my own fears around judgment. I find myself often wondering, and what if they judge me? Why does that matter? Even in what conversations I should have with my children or my family. And even as I reject these moral binaries, I think I still wrestle with parts of me that have been shaped by them. I mean, I don't know if you relate to that, but you can become someone completely different than who you were, and yet still recognize that who you were is influencing who you are today. And I think there's still parts of me, I think there will always be parts of me that kind of are revealed in layers. I call them veils. If you had 50 colored veils over your eyes, you would essentially probably be blindfolded. But every chance that you're able, or every opportunity that you have to see one of the colors, and you see one of the veils for what it is, and you can pull it off, you're that much more able to see. But each veil kind of has to be removed by itself, or each one has to be removed individually. So I don't really feel a need to justify my approach, this idea of being hidden or secret or whispered about, because I think it's worth sitting in the question, what keeps us from being fully seen? And does that always mean that we're hiding? And does hiding always mean something bad? There's another part to this too that's interesting to think about, and that's, who are the people who actually really get to be free? I don't know. I mean, privilege plays a part a little bit in this, if you're honest with yourself. There are people who have the privilege to be able to be really honest and open about what they're talking about with less consequence, I guess, or less impactful consequence. And yet that's not the only thing that comes into play, because there are those of us who could be fully open, and we still choose not to be. And I'm sure we all have different reasons as to why we're choosing not to be. The other question is, this idea of non-duality also has a component of balancing duality to it. Can I hold both truths at once? That I'm free, and yet I still have limits. that we believe in openness, let's say, and yet we still choose privacy. Or that we're not ashamed, and yet we live in a world where shame exists. And that makes me think that it's really not about hypocrisy or even survival or strategy, but maybe it's just a part of being human. And so for me, this podcast is that example of being human and the complexity that there is to it. There's actually it seems to be an acceptable kind of rebellion that exists. There are some expressions of sexuality that are embraced, but others that, continue to be whispered about or judged or even just completely rejected. This version of sexual empowerment that's become trendy, body positivity, sex toys, cute little mention of a kink in your Instagram bio. Those are trendy sexual empowerment topics. But if you bring up sex work or non-monogamy, or certain aspects of, I guess, what's now called queerness, that makes people uncomfortable. And then sometimes if you bring up anything that's not the default, which is straight monogamous sexuality, people feel like you're trying to make a statement, even though you're not trying to make a statement. You're maybe just trying to have a conversation or explore a concept or a thought or a desire that you have. But it can often be judged in that way. So for those of us who can't or choose not to be fully open, does that mean we have to disappear? Or can there be a real power in the spaces we create quietly and intentionally and on our own terms? Maybe being visible isn't always about being seen by everyone. Maybe it's about being seen deeply, but by the people who are ready. That's how I feel about these conversations. I've created a space for myself where I get to be seen, but I'm being seen by people who are interested, who want to have the conversations. And I don't feel like I'm disappearing or that I'm hiding. I feel like I'm creating something intentional that's on my own terms. But there's also an aspect to this, the fact that I'm keeping something secret, or I'm not coming out completely to those around me, or to those, maybe even those who are close to me. And it's this, I'm carrying the weight a little bit of a dual life. And there's something tiring about living in two realities. In one space, I feel open and free. In another, I have to filter and edit, constantly adjust. And it's not always about what I say, it's about who I'm allowed to be. And the code switching constantly, it really adds up. It's like carrying an invisible kind of weight around. And so I do wonder, is there a way to live more fully without losing the parts of my life that matter? And again, that's what this podcast is kind of doing for me, creating a space where I can do that. And so I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to be hypocritical. I don't want to create a sense of judgment before anyone even walks into the room because, you're walking into something that's hidden or unknown or doesn't want to identify itself. That's not my goal at all. I feel empowered to have these conversations. And maybe that'll change at some point, but being able to be unidentified, it's definitely a feeling of empowerment. And maybe we don't need to choose between being totally open or completely hidden. It's not all or nothing. Maybe integration and revelation of yourself is more slow. It's more intentional. It's more layered, like those veils that I talked about in front of your vision. And maybe it's not about proving anything. I think maybe it's also about choosing who gets access and when. And trusting ourselves to know the difference. I had a conversation recently with one of my family members, and it was so impactful when I told them that You're entitled to privacy. You don't have to share everything, and it's not you keeping a secret. It's just you being private about something. And I think that often gets underrated or overlooked. We're so big on authenticity nowadays, and being authentic is very important, being able to be who you are. But I think it gets sacrificed for the idea that we have to let the whole world know everything about us. And I don't think that's, especially with the internet nowadays, I don't think human beings are built for that. I think it's good to have a slow, intentional, layered approach to discovering who you are, and a slow, intentional, layered approach to showing who you are to other people. So I don't know if this was interesting to anyone else, but I did feel like I needed to kind of discuss the elephant in the room if we're going to have these conversations that are fun and important and deep and impactful and shouldn't be shamed, and we shouldn't be embarrassed about, why are we doing it in secret. And so I wanted to just address that. And just to close, as a closing thought, kind of, I think maybe one day the world will be ready for full acceptance. Maybe one day, I won't have to compartmentalize. But until then, I just kind of exist in this in-between space. I'm not ashamed, not afraid, just aware. And maybe you do too. If I were fully known or fully seen, if there was no hidden version of me, would my life fall apart? Or would it just shift into something else? And, maybe I'm not ready for that answer. So until then, we'll get to keep hanging out here and talking about fun things here, and maybe enjoying the fact that it's a little taboo. It's a little forbidden. It's a little hidden. I'm looking forward to having the next conversation with you guys. So I'll see you next time. Thank you for being here. Tip the lounge or grab your free journal while it lasts at whisperlounge.club.